So I got the wood for the legs from a section of the barn. This is not structural. This was a part of the stalls that had been in the downstairs of the barn and obviously are no longer being used. There's no livestock that's been in this building for a very long time. So I brought this piece down and had to denail in, again, as usual, in all of my best OSHA approved workplace gear. It's you get a range in these videos from the hot season into the very cold season. So sometimes I'm in parkas and massive winter boots, and sometimes I'm in my OSHA approved halter dress. But as you can tell, I do wear my hearing protection and boots when it seems relevant. So yeah, any complaints, send them to the complaints department. So yeah, the story with this bench is that I've been using, if you've been following along, I've been using kind of sentimental materials the whole way through. The bench top is made entirely of white pine that had belonged to my dad. So it felt good to have a little piece of the barn that was going into the legs. So easiest thing was to just chop down the rough cuts with my circular saw to get the rough lengths. And even at that, I still have to go in with my Japanese saw at the end to get all the way through. So I'm kind of just burning through this part of the process so that it's in here and you guys get to see sort of all of the background that goes before I even get to the joinery. But obviously it's very time consuming and there's only so much that you guys want to be looking at, so I'm not going to spend forever on it. I guess just some quick points that I'll make about the joining and the planing process. You'll see that I'm using my pencil quite a lot to give myself really good landmarks so that I can see when the joiner and when the planer have actually touched the surface of the piece that I'm working on. Sometimes it can get difficult to tell, and you can end up missing out on really genuinely getting a fully flat surface. So I'm starting with the joiner. That gives me my really nice clean reference edge, and so then that joined face becomes what I put against the plates of my planer, and then that gives me a parallel on the opposite side. So I know that I have two surfaces opposite one another that are machine flat and that they're parallel to one another. Then once I have those two parallel surfaces done, I can use that initially joined face to put against the rail of the joiner. That'll give me a nice clean 90-degree surface, and then that is the face that goes against the rail on my table saw. So that is the quick and dirty version of milling from rough to get a 4 square board or plank or whatever that you know that your surfaces are in alignment with one another. So now that I've got my boards milled up, I am going to place them over the mortises, and I'm going to mark for the tenons directly off of the mortises. Now, all of the mortises we did by measurement, and you can do your mortises or your tenons first. It doesn't really matter. Different people have opinions on how you want to go. The thing that's important is that whichever you do first, you do off of your measurements, you do it as accurately as you can, and you finish it to your satisfaction as best as you can. So you want to go in with your squares, your sterrets, like a really accurate squares, and make sure that you've got all of the surfaces as flat as you possibly can and that you've got it really to where you want it. So that then when you go in with in this case, marking for the tenons, you're not going to take any measurements. You're going to just hold it to the piece, and you're going to mark your tenons directly off of reality, because measurements aren't going to do you any good. What's important is that it matches the mortise. So then, same as when we were doing the mortises, I'm going to come in and extrapolate those lines from the end where I've marked off of what the mortise actually had. And so then we need to carry those lines down the side. And I do that with both pencil, and then I go back in with my marking knife. The pencil is really so that I can have a good vision of what it is that I'm doing. It can be really difficult to see what's happening if you only have the lines from your marking knife, but you really want to cut in the fibers with the knife. It is way more accurate to follow than a pencil line, and it also gives you a much cleaner joint, because if you're trying to go along with your chisel and you haven't like cut all of those little fibers on the surface yet, you can end up tearing away some of these wood fibers right at the surface where you might be looking at them. So good to do both. And then, as you've seen me do before, you'll see me go back in and really make it very obvious for myself what is meant to stay and what is meant to go, which is to say, I put big pencil X's all over everything that is going to get cut away, because it's just so easy to get over enthusiastic in the moment and cut the wrong thing off. So here you've got a pretty clear idea of what's going to stay and what's going to go. And it does look like a little bit of a mess at the moment, but it'll come together. So we're going to dive right in here with the saw cuts. Same premise as when we were doing the mortises. You'll notice that I'm cutting at a diagonal, so I'm only actually doing my saw cuts on lines that I can visualize. So when it comes time for me to cut the sort of third side of this joint, I'll turn the piece around so that I can actually see. So never cut anything that you can't actively see in the moment. You think you're doing something really straight and clean, and turns out that on the other side of it, it's a complete mess. You may or may not pick up on the fact that I'm actually having to clean the saw off fairly regularly because of the sap, and at this point this blade is starting to get a little bit old. I am enjoying using the Japanese saws, which is what I'm using in this particular moment. But I don't love that once you have dulled your blade that you really kind of have to just discard that blade and buy a new one. Whereas the more English style joinery saws, you can sharpen the teeth and kind of carry on as before. So there are some interesting differences between them. I have used both and enjoyed both. With the Japanese style saw, you're getting your primary cuts on the draw back, whereas with the English style saws, you're getting the cut with the push, and so it definitely feels different, but I don't know. We'll stay tuned for future videos and see if I end up switching my approach or my opinion here at some point. So here we're going to start chopping away. As with the other videos that I've put up, you know, you have different options for how you can chop out this material. If you have the ability to drill press or things like this, any way that you want to get the material out of the way is valid. I personally find it pretty pleasurable to just kind of chop it with my chisel and have it fall away. Especially, you'll see in a minute when we get to the larger chunk that's makes up the right angle on the other side of this joint. In this situation, because this is such a large joint, I mean, these are certainly the largest joinery of this kind that I've really done. I'm used to doing, you know, dovetails and hogstooth or whatever, you know, by hand. So my tools are not, you know, I'm not carrying around like a timber framer's chisel set. So my largest chisel is kind of the only really appropriate size for this kind of work that I was doing. And because I don't have facilities in the barn to be doing my sharpening really accurately out there, I have to take all of my blades and chisels and whatnot inside the house in order to sharpen. So I end up kind of using my full set of chisels just because I don't want to stop work to go sharpen. So anyways, all of that to say that in this particular situation, you'll notice sometimes that my tools might not be the ideal ones for the particular task that I'm doing. The joint that I'm working on in that moment, you can see that my saw isn't actually able to cut the whole way down that face, and so I'm ending up doing more cutting with the chisel than I would have in that circumstance. In this particular spot, what a pleasure. I'm able to, you know, saw from two sides, and because this part of the joint is just like a rabbet or a rebate, however you state that, then I'm able to just like chop, 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 and all the material falls away, and it's very, very pleasing. So that's the fun part. And then once I've cut away enough material that the saw can get a little further in, then I'm able to clean up those edges. So I know there's a little bit of a repeat here depending upon if you've been watching all of the other videos in the process of making this bench, but it bears repeating that your saw cuts are inside of your pencil lines so that you're not taking your saw cuts all the way to the edge, so that you have this room to do the chisel work in the spaces that it's more important for it to be really accurate. So at this point I'm starting to get down to where I've got the really broad strokes out of the way. And once these big pieces are out of the way, then you start getting into more finesse technique and needing to be a little bit more accurate. I have my large Starrett square, and I have just a smaller straight edge that I'm using in this particular case because these joints are so large. Now if I'm doing joinery that's of my more normal size, like if I was working on a piece of furniture, I have a very small Starrett square that's a 3-inch. That's great, and I also have a little dovetail addition that goes into the Starrett square that allows me to fit that into a really small space. So what I'm doing is I'm just using the square as a straight edge so that I can actually visualize where I have high points, and I'm marking them with my pencil and then going in and getting rid of any of the pencil lines that I've created. So it's kind of just making a little bit of a topographical map for yourself to see what you need to shave down. And again, all of this is based off of having shown the leg to the mortise and marking for the tenon on it. So once I have created a general idea of the joint, then I'm going to start showing it to the piece again and seeing if I can get it to fit. But for now, this initial part is just trying to get the cleanest, straightest lines based off of those markings that I took from the joint that already exists. Okie dokie. So I've got a decent sense of liking the way that my tenon is for the moment, and so I'm beginning to show it to the mortise. And as is so often the case, unless you're way more experienced than I am, it's going to take some adjustment. So you show it to the joint, you use your pencil again, mark out where things need to be modified, and then you go back in and you do the modification. As is often the case, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity that I could just cut out this footage. There's, there's the option that I could do an abracadabra moment and be like, yeah, this is me cutting out this tenon, and I magically popped it into this mortise and everything's perfect. But it's just really not the way that it goes, and it's possible that, as I've mentioned before, this is a size of joinery that is totally new to me. So perhaps somebody who does a lot more large joinery, like timber framers or things like that, would be less exacting. I know that that's certainly something that you run into in different practices. There's margins of error that are more and less acceptable, and so sometimes when you have somebody who's trained to do something, say like fine carpentry, fine furniture making, like I was, and they're working on something that's large and more structural, they end up being far more finicky than is necessary. So I can totally imagine the possibility that somebody who is trained to do work that's a little bit more of this size might think that that I'm too fussy. That's possible. I'm not gonna get too hung up on it because this particular project is for me, and I would like to have this be a really clean and tight fit, and it's all a learning process for me as well. So I don't mind whatever extra time went into this. This ended up being so much of a longer project than I had planned anyways. So that's my own justifications, and then for the sake of the video, I think that it's worth, even in, this is like 8 times high speed or something like that. Even in this like fast forwarded version, you start getting a sense of how long it takes and how many times you kind of have to try something and then go back and adjust it and try something again and go back and adjust it, and things are rarely perfect the first time you try them in real life. And I think that sometimes we get this kind of magical imagining of how things just work for other people, and sometimes that can be very disheartening, I find, where it seems like somebody else just does something magically and it works, and then you try and do it yourself and it feels very hopeless and very disheartening. And so I think that there's value in showing how many cups of hot water you end up drinking in the process of doing something like this. You know, how long you're out in the cold. So yeah, I'm finally fitting this first leg in this joint, and we're just gonna super high speed blast through the subsequent ones, because there were 3 more legs that I had to do. So everything that has led up to the first 20 minutes of this video, I had to do it all again 3 more times. So just a little sense of exactly how much was involved in doing this project. I have really long arc lamps that I use for bringing this home, and these are the 4 legs installed, which felt like sort of a miraculous moment. And then I was able to turn it over, and magic. Like, no effort at all. Hi guys, thank you for your patience in waiting around for that latest edition. It took way longer to get that video shot and finish that particular part of the project, and to get the editing finished than was anticipated, as evidenced by the fact that I start out in like a halter dress and I'm finishing in a toque. So between pregnancy and Lyme's disease and life, things got a little bit out of hand. But now we're, you know, out the other side of it, and finally getting this video out. So I hope that you enjoy it, and hopefully things start getting reined in here a little bit more. Who knows? You know, life continues, but there's more to come, and I hope you stick around. And if you enjoy it, please feel free to go over and check out the Patreon page and throw in a little support, because it does take a lot to get some of these videos put together and follow through with the full process of getting them out to you guys. So your support is very much appreciated, and a huge thank you to the people who've been supporting me so far. I can't thank you enough. So we'll see you guys on the next one.